What do you do when the players do something unexpected, like immediately kill the boss? When I ran the original Ravenloft, my players one-shotted Strahd von Zarovich in less than a round. It could have been a disaster, but I came back from it stronger, faster, more resilient. Today's video is about adopting the right referee mindset. It's about how I stopped worrying about story and learned to love rolling dice in the open. It's about my journey towards embracing the chaos that is OSR gameplay. Hope everyone had a nice Halloween. I'm going to share how my players nuke Strahd, but more importantly, how you can make some mindset shifts that both insulate you from chaos and make your campaigns more fun, entertaining, and surprising. But we'll start with the Nuking Strahd story because it's pretty funny. So I was running a campaign in Greyhawk. We placed it in the Earldom of Sterich, or Steric, in Western Steric. It's valleys surrounded by mountains. I created a setting that was like these isolated, misty villages. I placed a whole series of creepy, horror-themed Gothic adventures there. It was old school D&D. We called that campaign Gothic Greyhawk. And at some point, the players released this zombie apocalypse that had 10,000 undead flood the isolated valley. It completely wrecked everything that they'd been doing to that point. And they ended up heading deeper into the mountains, leading a column of villagers and refugees out of the zombie apocalypse into the mountains, where they knew that there were some isolated valleys. And they stumbled right into the valley of Barovia. And Barovia is the setting for I6 Ravenloft. Back then, there was no concept of domains of dread or demi-planes. Barovia was just a valley you could put in any of your campaigns. It was a cursed valley, and Strahd could close it so people couldn't leave. But you could just put it on the map in your campaign. And so I did that in Greyhawk. And if you're not familiar with this one, it does get a lot of press here around Halloween. Players get stuck in this cursed valley of Barovia. They end up exploring a haunted castle looking for relics that will help them defeat the ancient vampire lord that's hunting them. It's a classic D&D/horror adventure. There's a lot of advice in the book on how to keep Strahd alive long enough for a satisfying finale. Obviously, I failed at that horribly. In our first showdown with Strahd, he snuck out of a secret door and attacked the players from behind. They're all 5th and 6th level. He starts laying into their rear guard. And old school vampires are horrifying. They hit you and they drain 2 energy levels. So you're a 6th level character, bam. Now you're 4th level. If he hits you again 2nd, and again 0. And players hate energy drain because that's like months of time playing your character. Just poof, gone forever. Anyway, newer editions clearly have gotten rid of that. So all it took was getting surprised by Strahd and having one character get whacked, and the players are all flipping over their character sheets, desperate for an answer on how they can drive him back and get out of this mess. And the cleric's like, wait a second, I've had this thing forever. Scroll of Dispel Evil. What's Dispel Evil anyway? So Dispel Evil, it's a very high-level cleric spell. It exists both in AD&D and in basic D&D. In AD&D, where there's demons and devils and Ifrit and Jinn and other kinds of interplanar creatures, conjured elementals, for instance, AD&D will send those things back. But we weren't playing AD&D. We're playing basic. We're using this, the expert set. I'm going to put this on the screen so you guys can see it too. Dispel Evil. This spell will banish or destroy an undead monster. And then if it's cast at a single target, it makes a saving throw at -2. This was going to be a problem. What are my options in this situation? Obviously, in modern D&D, 5e and things like that, they give your boss monsters all sorts of cheaty special abilities like legendary resistances, where you can just hold up your hand and say, no, I'm not going to be affected by any of your cool stuff. Bosses don't have plot immunity in old school D&D. So I did the only thing I could do. I stood up at the table and picked up my Roll20, my D20, start shaking it. Everybody's like leaning in close to see what's going to happen. And I'm like, chunk, 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 chunk in front of the players. And of course, it comes up a natural one. And the players all exploded around the table in joy. And that's how Strahd got nuked by a scroll in about 1 round. Now, you may say, I could be the worst Ravenloft referee of all time. I got Strahd killed in less than a round. And you might not be wrong. If we're going to use dice and we're going to roll in the open, we're inviting randomness into our world. And when you invite randomness into the world, random and chaotic things will happen. And sometimes that means your boss gets nuked by a random scroll that you had even forgotten the players had been carrying around for months and months. So I think my first piece of advice about surviving as an OSR referee, first is cultivate a kind of Zen-like detachment about good and bad results. It's going to happen. As they say, sometimes you're the dog, sometimes you're the hydrant. I know this sounds like a terrible story for Halloween, how Strahd got killed in less than a round, but it does have a happy ending, a happy referee ending. 2 techniques I've developed through the years, 2 mindset techniques I call it. First is next man up, and the second is saying yes and. Next man up, it's like your favorite sports team. The running back gets injured, he limps off the field. Coach doesn't go into a corner and cry or call the game or say we can't play anymore. No, he just looks at the bench and tries to get the next person in there and keep the game going. And so if your players kill the boss, the first thing you have to do is see if there's another boss. And sometimes when there isn't, you just have to say, yes, okay, that's a thing that happened. Now, here's what's going to happen next. And I was able to do both of those with this Ravenloft situation. So the players went off to celebrate. They looted Strahd's treasury. They're throwing gold around like Scrooge McDuck and the Monopoly Man. And they go down to the village of Barovia. They're celebrating with all of the villagers and the refugees. And I'm thinking, this is an entire castle full of monsters now. And Strahd was the only person keeping them in check. In fact, all the other vampires are now free-willed vampires. And so the brides of Strahd decided to become the queens of Ravenloft. And the castle's not big enough for 2 queens. So one of them takes over the castle. The other one's forced to flee into the wilderness where she established herself nearby in a series of caves up in the hills. And then they start attacking villagers at night. Both of them came up with the idea that they needed to turn as many people as they can to build out their armies. This is not anything Strahd would do. He was focused on finding his beloved, the reincarnated Tatiana, but these new vampires have no such restraints. And so the 2 vampire queens both start turning villagers like crazy. The next morning, the players are like, hey, where are those farmers we helped out? Their tents are empty, that kind of a thing. And before they knew it, they realized this isn't over. We had entered a new arc of the campaign. It was the Night War. And the players still had to explore the castle because they needed all those vampire killing relics so that they had a chance going after the 2 brides of Ravenloft. Furthermore, there were all these witches in the castle who were now left to their own devices too, so they could pursue their own quests. And they wanted to look for their legendary progenitor, the demon witch Igwilf, who had this book, the Demonomicon of Igwilf. And if that rings a bell to you, we were playing Greyhawk. That's the plot hook for S4, The Lost Caverns of Zoicanth, which also takes place in the mountains of Greyhawk. And so in this way, yes, I lost Strahd in less than a round, but the campaign pivoted into this awesome guerrilla warfare against these 2 dueling vampire queens. And then beyond that, the players began to realize that they were going to have to deal with this witch problem. And they couldn't let the witches resurrect Igwilf or find her ancient lair or unearth the Demonomicon. At least, It all worked out brilliantly. I used to think if the dice give you lemons, figure out how to make lemonade. But that sort of implies that something negative happened. And I tend to think of it now, like I said, I try to stay more detached about the highs and the lows of rolling in the open, because you really are inviting randomness into your game. But your game, I think, is more honest, has more integrity, and certainly is more fun this way. So here's the actionable advice about all this. Don't get down in the moment by random results. Cultivate like that Zen-like detachment, stoicism, if you will. And then use the quiet time between game sessions to reflect. Is there a next man up? Can you find a new boss or a new villain out of the ashes of the old one? Because if the other guy could get punked in one round, clearly he wasn't the real boss. It's one way of thinking about it. And second, is there a way to say yes and, hey, this unexpected thing happened at the table, but now this is what happens instead. And that will let you push your game in surprising directions, things you didn't anticipate. I find this is where the real joy of being a referee comes from. It's so much fun. An example from a recent game, for instance, we just finished B5, the Horror on the Hill, like a month or so ago with one of my home campaigns. Yeah, the players killed the dragon at the 3rd level of the dungeon really quickly, quicker than I expected. It was, again, one of those things, you could call it dice hate or not, where the dragon gets unlucky and the fighter with the dragon slaying sword rolls a crit and a thief backstabs it for triple damage. And sometimes you're the hydrant. They killed my baby. But instead, I reflected and said, well, that was a thing that just happened. And now the yes and part is, and now you're famous. You guys killed a dragon. You're dragon slayers. You're rich. And everybody in the campaign world's going to know about it. So instead of being just sort of anonymous, humble adventurers out there on the frontier, they've now been thrust into the capital, into politics, and the campaign's gone in a completely different direction, and a fun direction. This Strahd thing happened a long time ago, 12, 13 years ago, in my OSR journey, but it seemed like a good Halloween story. My advice, because these are the things I do, I always roll in the open. I embrace the integrity of the dice and invite chaos down into the table through random results. It's forced me to let go of any expectations of stories. You know, there's a saying, isn't it like, man plans and God laughs? Well, our version of it is referees plan and the dice laugh. There's always going to be some kind of a next man up for you. Or if you just have to acknowledge that something bends, you can employ say yes and build on the player's actions and send your game off to have some interesting consequences. Anyway, the results by relying on the dice and sort of embracing random wacky stuff that's going to happen, your games will be more exciting, more fun, surprising, satisfying. That's it for today. I'm John. Thanks for being here. Please consider subscribing, especially if you've enjoyed my content. Next week, we're going to get back to something Shadow Dark oriented. I've been working with the Isle of Dread for one of my home campaigns and working through conversion on how we could run that as a Shadow Dark adventure. So I think that's what we're going to do next week. Talk about how to convert the Isle of Dread and run it for Shadow Dark. All right. See everyone next time.